My sister was barely in the ground when my own son leaned close and told me she'd left me nothing. Debts, he said. Charity. Nothing for me. And I believed him, because you believe your child at a funeral. But my sister never owed a soul a dime in her life. And 3 months before she got sick, she held my hand and promised me I'd be looked after. So why was my daughter-in-law suddenly taking my mail before I could read it? Why did a bank teller know the name of a lawyer my children swore didn't exist? And why, on a gray morning they thought I'd sleep through, was there a letter in my mailbox with my name on it, and a signature at the bottom that I never wrote? I'm 72 years old. I buried a husband and raised that boy myself. And standing in my kitchen with that letter shaking in my hands, I understood they'd made one mistake. They thought I'd stopped checking the mail. My sister Vivian died on a Tuesday in March. By Saturday, my own son had already told me she left me nothing. He told me gently. I will give him that much. Paul has always had a soft way of saying hard things. A way of putting his hand on your arm first, so the words land easier. We were standing in the back corner of the funeral home, near the table of little sandwiches nobody was eating, and he leaned close and said, "Mom, I looked into Aunt Viv's estate. There's nothing there. It went to charity, and what was left went to her debts." I remember nodding. I remember the carpet was the color of weak coffee. I was 72 years old. I had just watched them lower my baby sister into the ground. I did not have it in me to ask a single question. So I didn't. That was my first mistake. I trusted the wrong person, at the worst possible moment. But here is the thing that wouldn't leave me alone, even that first night, lying in the dark of my own house on Linden Street. Vivian didn't have debts. My sister counted her change at the grocery store. She kept the same Buick for 19 years. She used to say money was just patience you could spend later. The idea that she died owing anyone a dime, it was like being told the sun came up in the west. And there was something else. Something she'd said to me at Christmas, only 3 months before she got sick. She held my hand across her kitchen table and said, "Ruthie, don't you worry about getting old alone. I've made sure you'll be looked after." I had laughed and told her not to talk like that. Now I lay in the dark, and I wondered. If she left nothing, then what did she mean? What had she made sure of? I told myself I was grieving and grasping. I told myself Paul knew about these things and I did not. I told myself to let it rest. But grief has a strange way of sharpening your hearing. And over the next few weeks, I began to notice things I would have missed before. The first was the mail. For years, I have walked to my mailbox at the end of the drive a little after 11 every morning, right after the carrier comes through. It is one of the small pleasures of living alone. The walk. The click of the little metal door. The handful of envelopes. But sometime after the funeral, my daughter-in-law Denise started coming by in the mornings. "Just to help, Mom," she said. "You shouldn't be standing out by the road. Let me get the mail and sort the bills, so you don't have to worry." Denise is an organized woman. She has a label maker, and a calendar with everyone's lives written on it in different colors. I have never been entirely comfortable around her. The way you're never quite comfortable in a room that's too clean to sit down in. But she was being kind, and I was tired. So I let her. And then one morning, I realized I hadn't held my own mail in 3 weeks. Not a bill. Not a catalog. Not the long, chatty letters Vivian's old neighbor Marie still sent me on flowered paper. Nothing. It all went into Denise's tote bag and came back to me as a small, sorted stack of exactly the things she decided I should see. I told myself she was just being thorough. But that afternoon, I mentioned, just in passing, that I ought to call Vivian's lawyer. just to be sure everything was truly settled. And Denise turned around from my kitchen sink very fast and said, "There's no lawyer anymore, Mom. It's all handled. Don't go stirring it up. It's all handled. Don't go stirring it up." I stood there with my dish towel in my hands, and I felt the first real cold finger of doubt go down my spine. Because I had never told Denise there was a lawyer. And if the estate had simply gone to charity, the way Paul said, then how would she know whether the lawyer was still around to call? I said nothing. I have learned, over 72 years, that the most useful thing a person can do is keep their face still and their ears open. But I started paying attention. The next week, I had to go to the bank. My pension check hadn't cleared, and I wanted to ask about it in person, the way people my age still do. The young teller was kind. And while she was looking up my account, she said something that stopped my heart. "Oh, Mrs. Caldwell, while you're here. Did you ever get that estate notice that came for you? It was returned to us once because the box was full, and then we forwarded it on to your home address." I kept my voice level. "Remind me which notice, dear." She glanced at her screen. It came from a law office. Whitfield and Mercer. They'd written to you more than once, actually. Something about a distribution. Whitfield and Mercer. I had never heard that name in my life. And Paul had told me, looking right into my eyes, that no notices had ever come. I thanked the girl, and I walked out into the parking lot, and I sat in my car for a long time without turning the key. A law office had written to me more than once. Letters had come to my own mailbox. And I had seen none of them. Someone was taking my mail before I could read it. I want to tell you that I confronted my son that very night. That I marched over and demanded the truth. But that is not what fear does to a mother. Fear made me careful. Because if I was wrong, I would be accusing my only child of something monstrous. And if I was right, then I was alone in a way I had never imagined. And I needed to be smart. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started getting up earlier. Denise came by around 10:30 most mornings. So I began going out to my mailbox at 7, in my robe, with the dew still on the grass, to see what came before she could take it. For days there was nothing but circulars and a water bill. I would put the bill back exactly as I found it, so she wouldn't know. I felt like a thief in my own life. And then, on a gray Thursday morning that smelled like rain, there was one white envelope waiting in the box. The return address read, Whitfield and Mercer, attorneys at law. My hands were not steady as I carried it inside. I sat at my kitchen table. The same table where Vivian had held my hand and promised I'd be looked after. And I opened it with a butter knife, because I couldn't make my fingers work the flap. "Dear Mrs. Caldwell," it began. "We write regarding the estate of Vivian Harmon, for which you are the named sole beneficiary." I read that sentence 4 times. The named sole beneficiary. Not charity. Not debts. Me. Everything my sister had, she had left to me. The letter went on, polite and patient, and every line of it was a small earthquake. They had written to me several times, it said. They were concerned they had not heard back directly. They needed me to confirm my wishes regarding the distribution of funds, and the property at Birch Lake. And then there was a line near the bottom that made the room tilt. "We note that the authorization we received bearing your signature instructs us to direct the proceeds as discussed. Please confirm this remains your intention." The authorization bearing my signature. I had never signed anything. I had never spoken to these people. I had never even heard the name Whitfield until a bank teller said it out loud, 2 days before. Someone had signed my name. Someone had been speaking to my sister's lawyer, pretending to be me, telling them where to send my sister's money. And I knew, sitting at that table with the rain finally starting against the window, exactly which two people had been so very eager to handle everything for me. I folded the letter and put it inside my Bible, on the shelf, where I knew no one would look. Then I made myself a cup of tea I didn't drink. And I tried to think. Because the worst part wasn't even the money. The worst part was understanding, finally, what my son had done at that funeral. He hadn't been comforting me. He had been buying time. The next few days, the family closed in. I see that now for what it was. Denise arrived one morning with a cheerful announcement, and a new key on a little ring. "Mom, I had a copy made of your mailbox key. That way, if you're not feeling up to it, I can grab everything even when you're resting. One less thing." She set it on my counter like a gift. She wanted the key because she had missed one letter. And she could not afford to miss another. And Paul came by that weekend with a folder of his own. He sat across from me, soft-voiced as ever, and slid a document toward me. "Mom, Denise and I have been talking. We think it's time we set up a power of attorney. Just so we can help with things. You know, if anything ever happened. It just makes everything simpler." He had a pen ready. He'd already clicked it open. I looked at that pen. And I looked at my son's face. And I understood that if I signed that paper, I would be handing them the last thing I had. Not just my money. My name. My ability to speak for myself. They had forged my signature once. With a power of attorney, they would never have to forge it again. "Let me think about it, Paul," I said. And I made my voice tired and small, the way they expected me to sound. "I'm just so worn out these days." He patted my hand. "Of course, Mom. No rush. We just want to take care of you." I have never in my life been so frightened by a kind sentence. That night, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. But I also knew I couldn't use my own phone. I had a feeling, by then, that Denise checked it when she tidied up. So the next morning I walked 2 doors down, to my neighbor Frank Delgado, a retired postman who has lived on Linden Street as long as I have. And I asked if I could use his telephone for a private call. Frank, bless him, didn't ask a single question. He just pointed me to the kitchen, and went out to his garden to give me room. I dialed the number from the top of the letter. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my ears. A woman answered, and I asked, in the steadiest voice I could manage, to speak with Mr. Whitfield. About the estate of Vivian Harmon. There was a pause. Some muffled words. And then a man came on the line. "This is Gerald Whitfield." "Mr. Whitfield," I said. "My name is Ruth Caldwell. Vivian was my sister. I believe you've been trying to reach me." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely. It had gone careful. Alert. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said slowly. "Forgive me. May I ask you to confirm something? Have we spoken before? On the telephone?" "No, sir," I said. "We have never spoken. Today is the first time I've ever heard your voice. I only learned your name from a teller at my bank, 2 days ago." Another long silence. I gripped the edge of Frank's kitchen counter. And then Mr. Whitfield said the words that turned my whole world over. "Mrs. Caldwell. I have spoken with a woman calling herself Ruth Caldwell at least 4 times over the past 2 months. We have exchanged emails. I have a signed authorization in my file. If that was not you." He stopped. I heard him take a breath. "If that was not you, then I need to freeze this estate today. Right now. Do you understand?" I sat down in Frank Delgado's kitchen chair, because my legs had stopped working. Yes, I whispered. Please. Freeze it. Over the next hour, sitting in a stranger's kitchen while his tomato plants nodded in the window, Mr. Whitfield and I began to put the pieces together. He had been contacted, not long after Vivian's death, by someone who said she was me. She had given him my address, my date of birth, even my late husband's name. She told him I was overwhelmed by grief, and preferred to handle everything by email and phone. And she had sent him an authorization, signed Ruth Caldwell, directing that Vivian's savings be transferred into a new account, and that the cottage at Birch Lake be prepared for sale. Mrs. Caldwell, he said gently. The email address we corresponded with. I'll read it to you. Does it mean anything? And he read it out, slowly. It was a string of letters and numbers. But in the middle of it, plain as day, were the letters that spelled Denise. I closed my eyes. He told me he would send copies of everything. The authorization. The emails. All of it. Sealed, to any address I trusted. I gave him Frank's. I was not about to let it land in my own box. 2 days later, the package arrived at Frank's door. And I sat at my own kitchen table to open it. As I was spreading the papers out, my granddaughter Hannah let herself in the back. Hannah is 23. Paul and Denise's only child, just home from her first real job in the city. She is the one good, honest thing that family ever produced, and she has loved me her whole life. She came in calling out, "Grandma, I brought you those lemon cookies you like." And then she saw my face. And she saw the papers. And she stopped. "Grandma? What's wrong?" I didn't have the strength to hide it anymore. I just slid the authorization toward her. The one with the forged signature. And then the printout of the emails. And I watched my granddaughter's face as she read. She went very pale. She reached out and touched the email address with one finger, the way you touch something to be sure it's real. "Grandma," she said, and her voice had gone to almost nothing. "This is Mom's email. This is the account she made last year." I helped her set up the password. She looked up at me, and her eyes were full. "Grandma, I think Mom and Dad have been pretending to be you." To hear it said out loud, by their own daughter, was almost more than I could bear. But I reached across the table and held her hand, the way Vivian once held mine. And I told her the truth. "I know, sweetheart," I said. "I know they have. And now we have to decide what to do about it." Mr. Whitfield called Frank's house the next morning. And what he told me filled in the last of the picture. The plan, as best he could reconstruct it, was simple, and patient, and cruel. After Vivian died, Paul and Denise learned before I did that I was the sole heir. Vivian had told Paul as much, years ago, trusting him to look after his old aunt's wishes. Instead, the two of them saw an opportunity. They told me the estate was empty, so I would never go looking. Denise, posing as me, instructed the lawyer to move Vivian's savings, nearly $200,000, into a new account that Paul controlled. And they had quietly listed the lake cottage. My sister's beloved little house at Birch Lake. For sale. "Mrs. Caldwell," Mr. Whitfield said, and I could hear how carefully he was choosing his words. "I have to tell you there is a pending offer on the cottage. It's set to close in 9 days. If you had not called when you did." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. 9 days. In 9 days, the last place my sister and I had ever been happy together would have belonged to strangers. The money she saved her whole patient life would have vanished into my son's accounts. And I would have stood at my mailbox in my robe, never knowing any of it. I thanked Mr. Whitfield. I asked him to stop the sale and freeze every account. He told me he already had. And then I sat very still in my kitchen and let myself feel all of it. The grief. The rage. And underneath both, a terrible, aching love for the boy I raised, who had grown into a man who could do this to me. Then I dried my eyes. And I called my son. And I invited the whole family to Sunday dinner. They came, of course. They always came when I cooked. Paul, with his easy smile. Denise, with a store-bought pie and that organized brightness of hers. And Hannah, who could barely look at her parents, and kept close to me in the kitchen. I waited until we were all seated. I had made a roast, the way my mother taught me. The way I'd made it for this family 100 Sundays. And when everyone had a full plate, and Paul was halfway through some story about his business, I reached down beside my chair, and laid a single sheet of paper in the center of the table. Right next to the gravy. It was the authorization. The forged one. The story died in Paul's throat. Denise's fork stopped in the air. Paul, I said quietly. I'd like you to read the names signed at the bottom of that page. Out loud, please. For everyone. He looked at it. He looked at me. The color drained out of his face, the way it used to when he was a boy caught in a lie. And for just a moment, I saw that little boy again. And it broke my heart all over again. Mom, he started. I can explain, read the name, Paul. Denise found her voice first. Sharp and fast. Ruth, I don't know what you think you found, but I know exactly what I've found, Denise. I did not raise my voice. Not once. I've found the emails. The ones from the account Hannah helped you set up. I've spoken to Mr. Whitfield myself. I know that my sister left everything to me. I know you told me it was gone. I know you signed my name. And I know you put her cottage up for sale. The table was so quiet I could hear the clock in the hall. It was Paul who finally broke. He put his face in his hands. And when he spoke, his voice came out cracked and small. And he said the thing I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. We were going to tell you, Mom. We really were. We needed the money first. The business is failing. We're losing the house. We were going to pay it back. We just needed it first. We just needed it first. As if my sister's life savings were a thing they were entitled to borrow, without asking. As if the truth was something they'd have gotten around to, once it stopped being convenient to hide. I looked at my son for a long moment. Then I folded the paper back up, and put it in my pocket. You needed it, I said. So you decided I didn't. You decided a grieving old woman was an easier thing to lie to than a bank. He couldn't answer me. Neither of them could. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Whitfield did everything the law allowed. And the law, for once, was on the side of the honest. The forged authorization was declared void. The sale of the cottage was stopped, 1 week before it would have closed. Vivian's savings, which Paul had moved into his account, were frozen, and then returned. Every dollar. To the estate that was always meant to be mine. And Hannah, brave girl, told the lawyer the truth about the email account. Even knowing what it would mean for her parents. There was a question, near the end, that Mr. Whitfield had to ask me. Whether I wanted to press charges. Forgery and fraud are crimes, he reminded me gently. And what my son and his wife had done was both. I could see to it that they answered for it, in a courtroom. I thought about it for 3 days. I thought about every Sunday dinner. Every scraped knee I'd kissed. Every night I'd sat up with Paul's fevers when he was small. And I thought about Hannah, who would have to watch her parents stand before a judge. In the end, I did not press charges. Not because they deserved mercy. They didn't. But because I am Vivian's sister. And she always said the best revenge is to live well, and own no one your peace. Sending Paul to prison would have cost me more of myself than I was willing to spend. What I did instead was simpler. And in some ways, harder. I took back every part of my life they had touched. I changed my locks, and got my own mailbox key. The only one. I took Paul's name off of everything it had ever been on. And I sat down with Mr. Whitfield and put my affairs in order properly, the way Vivian had done. So that no one could ever again decide what I would, or wouldn't, be allowed to know about my own life. The person I named to look after my wishes, when I am gone, is Hannah. She wept when I told her. She said she didn't deserve it. I told her that deserving had nothing to do with it. That I was simply giving my trust to the one person in that family who had never once lied to me. Paul called. Many times. Denise did not. Paul left messages that started angry, and turned, eventually, into something like grief. I have not answered them yet. I may, someday. He is still my son. I still love him. And those two things did not stop being true, just because he broke my heart. But love and trust are not the same thing. And I have learned, far too late, that you can keep giving one long after the other is gone. On the first warm evening of June, I drove out to Birch Lake. The cottage was just as Vivian left it. Her reading glasses were still on the kitchen windowsill. The little porch still faced the water, and the two chairs we used to sit in were still side by side. Waiting. As if she'd only stepped inside for more iced tea. I sat down in my chair. The lake was gold and pink with the setting sun. A loon called somewhere out across the water. And for the first time since that Tuesday in March, I felt my sister near me. You did make sure I'd be looked after, Viv, I said out loud. To the water, and the evening, and the empty chair beside me. It just took me a while to find it. When I went back inside, I hung something on the wall by the door, in a plain frame. It was the letter. The one envelope they forgot to take. The one that slipped through on a gray Thursday morning, and told me, in a stranger's polite handwriting, that I was the named sole beneficiary. I keep it there so I'll see it every morning. To remind me that the people who should have protected me were the ones who lied. And a man I'd never met was the one who told me the truth. To remind me that I almost let them talk me out of trusting my own ears. And to remind me that the truth is a patient thing. You can hide it. You can steal it. You can sign someone else's name over the top of it. But sooner or later, it finds its way back to the right mailbox. It found its way back to mine.